This is your Wall Street wake-up call. Global stocks falling as the 10-year German Bund yield turns negative for the first time ever. Let's bring in Jasper Lawler now, a market analyst with CMC Markets in London. So Jasper, what do you make of this unprecedented move here, and what does it tell you about how investors are feeling right now?
Hi, Scott. Obviously, this particular price level in Bunds is a landmark just because of what it means for what investors are willing to do in current markets. Obviously, the implication being that over the next 10 years, investors are willing to pay for the privilege of lending to the German government. That's fairly unprecedented in Germany. But the thing we have to remember here is that this is not just a one-off aberration. This has been an ongoing trend. So German Bunds, we've been working our way back across the yield curve, and we finally hit the 10-year mark in terms of negative. But this has been a long-running trend. And I think we've got the several central bank meetings this week, the Fed, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England. They're really going to continue, I think, the theme that central banks remain in accommodative policy mode. And while that's the case, and inflation expectations are driven into the floor, that coupled with these difficult markets where people are looking for havens, those two drivers are really what's pushing people out of equities for the time being, but very much a long-running theme of into bond markets.
Yeah, and I want to talk about central banks in a moment, but first, you mentioned it was an ongoing trend, these yields. Would you say, though, it's exacerbated by uncertainty surrounding the Brexit vote next week?
I think that's certainly been the trigger point in the last week or so. We've seen UK yields hit record lows. UK 10-year gilts have dropped to their lowest ever. And so that, I think, is the kind of point of the spear. And obviously, Bunds, being part of Germany, very much part of the risk factor here. And I think it's something that people haven't been considering up to date, is, of course, the UK is exiting from the Eurozone. That's distinct risks for the UK, but also poses distinct risks for the Eurozone as well. And so I think that's why in Europe, we're also looking for safety in the space of bonds rather than the likes of equity markets, and that's explaining the drop in one, the rise in the other.
Okay, and going back to central banks for a moment, can you talk about what this means for both the Bank of Japan and the Federal Reserve? Are they looking at this in different ways? Because, of course, we have negative interest rates in Japan already. Absolutely.
JGB's another example of pushing into new record lows this week. And so I think it's going to, what we're going to hear here is just more of the same. These central banks, there's a worry now in markets that they're pushing on a string. And they have started to make a few utterances that they know that. A big point in markets last week was when Mario Draghi, in a speech, suggested that we need, as a matter of emergency, for governments to step in with structural reforms, the sort of implication being that actually monetary policy is done about as much as it can. Now, the Bank of Japan, they've been some of the most extreme, but their negative interest rate policy has really backfired on them. And so my sense is they can't do more of that. If they are going to do something, it's going to be helicopter money, but I think that's not quite yet.
Oh, God, the H word, helicopter money, who knows? We'll be watching. Jasper Lawler, a market analyst with CMC Markets. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
I'm Scott Gam, and you're watching The Street.